Well, Jeremy, thanks for doing this again. This is take two for people who don't know. We tried this a week ago, but internet overseas just wasn't working for us. And so thank you for twice your time here. Um, why don't you start off with a little bit of your background as we talk about the headline to this is probably going to grab people's attention, Springfield and immigrants. So what's your background? And we mentioned this last week. Your dad spoke at Gateway at a missions event of some sort. I didn't even know that connection until John McCanna, who's a friend of yours, made that connection for us. So background and why you're speaking into this. Why are you an expert in Springfield?
Yeah, thanks, Pastor Josh. I appreciate the opportunity to just kind of sit down and talk through this, especially what does the kingdom look like in in issues that make the national news,
Yeah.
and how do we find our way in following Jesus through it? Like you said, there's a lot of connections that I feel like I have to Gateway. A lot of friends from a long time ago, current friends. We're not that far away, just a couple hours up the road or down the road from you guys. Uh, yeah, I have an interesting or a unique perspective on some of the current events. I grew up, as I mentioned in an article I wrote recently, I grew up an immigrant, so I was a missionary kid, and which is not exactly the same. I get it, but I do understand leaving when you're young and making a home in a culture that's not your birth culture, and the challenges to assimilation and discovering a joy of being in a new land. There's a lot of dynamics that are at place there. I know that shapes my lens through some of this. I currently reside in Springfield, Ohio, which has become internet famous, world famous.
Infamous.
You mentioned, yeah, maybe. You mentioned traveling. I was in Asia last week, and normally when I'm over there, I have to explain to people where Ohio is in America. Um, I, I didn't even have to do that. I didn't have to tell people where Springfield was. The flight attendant on my Korean Air flight, when I told her I was from Springfield, she asked me, "Do you eat pets?" And I was like, "This is crazy that my Korean flight attendant knows exactly where this small town in Ohio is now." So it's a completely different landscape than what it was, 12 months ago. But I pastor here at Fellowship Church. We are a congregation of about 52 years old. We were actually birthed out of the Jesus Revolution. So if you've watched that movie, our founding pastor has a connection to Lonnie Frisbee and that movement that started our church back in the 70s, and all those hippies are now in their 60s and 70s. And so I have a joy to shepherd a really unique congregation here. We find ourselves in this town that there was for a long time. I had to explain where it was located to people even in Ohio. I don't know how many times I told them that we're basically between Dayton and Columbus. And after the comments in the first 10 minutes of the presidential debate a couple of weeks ago, literally everybody in the world knows where Springfield, Ohio is. And especially because of what's going on with the massive influx of the Haitian community over the last 18 to 24 months, our community has grown by 33%. So within the city limits is just under 60,000, and we have approximately 20,000 Haitians that have found their way here. So for a lot of reasons, we've got the national eye on how are we walking this out, and how does the church find itself and its way to influence towards the kingdom in all of this.
So about a week after that presidential debate, I don't know if it just went a little bit more mainstream a week later, but you did an op-ed that was in the USA Today. I saw quotes of it in Christianity Today, on the Gospel Coalition, all kinds of places. So what compelled you to write that op-ed piece at that time? And what have you received in response to that, both from your congregation, local community? Because I did see another Springfield resident wrote another op-ed piece that the USA Today put out as well. I think that in many ways they're complementary. I don't know that they're it's not like one against the other, but so what compelled you to write that, and what's been the response?
Well, um, t first, I think it's important to acknowledge that, even though the world has kind of taken notice in the last 2 weeks of what's going on, this has been something that, we have had to deal with, for, like, the last 2 years. And it's been at a heightened sense of intensity for just over a year. The news has covered, an accident that happened on the first day of school last year,
Hmm.
involving a Haitian driver, and a school bus, and a fatality of one of those students, that has probably kind of since that event has kind of thrust this whole community into this state of flux. And our city commission meetings, which happen every other Tuesday night, um, have just been incredibly difficult to be a part of or to witness, because there's just so much emotion and opinion. And as is everybody's constitutional right, everybody gets their 3 minutes to
Hmm.
voice that, and it has just been division on top of division, in a lot of ways, both in the commission meeting, but also in social media and just in the community. It's kind of become a shouting match. Over the last year, I've been asked several times by other members of the community, not anybody in city leadership, "Hey, when are you going to go down to the commission and talk?" And as I prayed about it, I just didn't feel like adding my voice to the noise was going to be productive. You know, I told our staff, we can go down and we can spend 3 minutes talking, and then just to have the next person get up and spend 3 minutes talking against everything we just said, or we can use our pulpit and we can disciple our people in what that response is going to be. So up until this point, most of my voice has just been heard through our church and through our own teaching and how do we respond that way. But
Hmm.
when everything went down 2 weeks ago, I felt like this was time that we actually needed to step up, and there needed to be, um, how do I say this? With all the opinions that were going around, we seem to be missing as the church in Springfield a bigger perspective, and is like, how would Jesus respond to this? And the reality is, Jesus may or may not have an opinion about a federal program of immigration and what resources were attached to the bill and whatever. But Jesus clearly has some instruction about how we love the people around us. And it felt like the church was missing the opportunity to see the Great Commission moment. It's ironic. I didn't even know all this was going on, but the Sunday before the debate, I was preaching and I mentioned, there's been a lot of stuff that's been happening in our community, and we had a protest with some neo Nazis that showed up a few weeks before that. And I just felt compelled to make the statement that, we at Fellowship, we are for what's happening as far as the Haitian community that's finding their home in our community, because if nothing else, the ends of the earth are coming to Springfield and they're saving us the airfare.
Hmm.
And so that was kind of my perspective. I had no idea that next Tuesday night everything would jump off. And it just felt like we needed to be talking about that more. And so I had the opportunity through um, Matthew Sorens, who wrote "Welcoming the Stranger." He and I collaborated a little bit on what a response would be, and then I wrote the op-ed, and he was able to help circulate it, and USA Today picked it up. And while we were working on that piece, Christianity Today reached out, and it's been kind of a stream of those kind of responses, as the rest of the country, even the world. We had a reporter from the largest newspaper in Tokyo actually show up at our church office wanting to do an interview. And so it's just crazy how widespread this has become.
Well, with all that, thank you again for taking time to do the Little Old Gateway Church podcast.
No,
Um,
no, no, no. This is
it,
great.
for those who haven't read it, one thing that you stressed, and 2 Sundays ago, I quoted, we were just jumping back into Romans 9, and Paul starts off with his love for the lost people around him, and that compelling statement of where he wishes that he could go to hell if it would cause
Yep.
them to believe. And so, in sort of some ways of challenging our love for the lost, I quoted from your op-ed. One of the things I appreciated is that you did not gloss over the federal government and its mismanagement of the situation, and yet you remind Christians, as you mentioned before, that our role is to love our neighbors. What have you seen happen, good or bad, of sometimes, and maybe you're alluding to this, the church starts to forget her role, and we start wanting to be the referees for what the federal government should be doing in our community, or when we expect the federal government to be doing what the church should be doing. How have you seen that played out well in Springfield? Where have you maybe longed for the church to recognize her role better? I don't know if that makes sense, but I
Yeah.
feel that tension of, instead of being the church, almost wanting to be assistants to the federal government.
Yeah. Well, and I think that the American church for a long time, and I mean, we could get into the history of this, but it goes back to the moral majority and the Reagan years, and is somehow the church, I think, began to accept the premise that in order for the kingdom that Jesus talks about to be visible, it requires us to have the right legislators and legislation and executives and judicial branch, and so it's almost like we turned our discipleship strategy towards our civic duty. And to be clear, like, I do believe that American Christians have a responsibility to be a part of the civic process. We have a stewardship responsibility
Mhm.
of the country that God has graciously allowed us to be born in. Like I said a minute ago, like I just returned from Asia. There are countries there that would like there are brothers and sisters in churches there that would die for the freedoms and opportunities that we have. So I think we have to steward that well. And
Yeah.
I'm not abdicating, or I'm not trying to say we abdicate our role in that space. But what I think happened is somewhere along the line, the Church of America, and I'm speaking with generalities here, began to think that that's the end all be all to our efforts to be salt and light in the community that God has allowed us to be a part of. And what I keep reminding our people at Fellowship, we actually back in April we just did a series called "One Nation Under God?" to just kind of start to reshape going into this election cycle what this looks like. Um, is that we go into the polling place and we have a 20-minute job to do, and then once we're done, the process carries itself out, and some of us are excited about the results, and some of us are frustrated by the results. But all of us, if we're followers of Jesus Christ, we still have a job to do after we leave the polls, and that is to be a salt and a light to the community around us. And yet, what happens is that often we feel like the big battle to be won is to be had in the legislature or legislation or in judicial or whatever. And I just feel like we need to reorient that and say that's a smaller role for the church. The bigger role is is actually following Jesus. I said in April, we are quick to try to identify with a donkey or an elephant. We need to remember that we pledged allegiance to a lamb, and that's who we're identifying with and who we're following. And so it has really felt like that has been a seminal point of conversation for the Church of America, is that if we follow Jesus and his example, I think we would see some bigger changes happen than what we're experiencing, you know, every 2-year election cycle when
Mhm.
half of us are, full of hope and half of us are full of despair. And then by the end of the next 2 years, the crowd that was hopeful is now full of despair, and the crowd that was in despair
Mhm.
now has hope. And we just kind of live this way. And every 4 years, we tend to try to elect a savior, and we forget that we had one once and we crucified him. So
Mhm.
maybe the election process is not the way to find the hope for the leadership that we need. Maybe we had it all along as followers of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, said to the folks here that vote, hold um, those elected accountable to the job that they're supposed to be doing,
Yep.
but uh, whether or not they do that doesn't excuse you from the job that Jesus is holding you accountable to. And
Exactly right.
yeah, and sometimes it's almost it's an interesting that um, posture of something like, well, we'll start loving our neighbors once the government starts doing their job, and I don't think that we get that excuse. And yeah, we are blessed here. I fought for this country, and but at the same time, I'm one of those pastors, no American flag in our
Yeah.
sanctuary, because we're here to worship Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Uh,
Can
you
we
mentioned,
get just like raw and dirty for a second?
yeah,
Like
go ahead.
this is the part that I think the American Christians really have to wrestle with. It is far easier to get all wrapped around an election process or a legislative bill that's going through, and then to sit back and to either rail about it on social media or to regurgitate talking points than it is to roll up our sleeves and actually go out into the community and do the things that we saw Jesus doing. It's
Mhm,
actually easier to just sit on our butts and say stuff as
mhm,
opposed to going and doing something. And last year Ohio, had the vote about um, legalizing abortion, and man, that was a hotly contested bill. And I had friends, believers, that fell on both sides of that bill. I mean, because it was a flawed bill and there were objections, understandably. And my point with what I said to our church is, it really doesn't matter whether it is passed, whether abortion is legalized, or whether life is protected. Although we are clearly for life. It doesn't matter if the church does what the church is supposed to do. If the church would step into those spaces and actually love people that are in these incredible situations, um, the way that Jesus would love it, it really doesn't matter what the legislation does, because the church would be able to take the lead. I feel
mhm,
like that's the same talking points that we have right now, is
mhm.
that it is more about being like Jesus and loving people around us than it is to try to hang our hat on whether or not a legislation or a leader got appointed to an office that is where our hope and our action needs to come from.
And as you know, the early church, um, they didn't have much of a legal voice, and yet they were still picking up the infants who were just tossed to the side in the garbage heaps and on the side of the road, and they changed culture
Yep.
by that. And I back to what you said earlier, I think that we're so used to having a stronger cultural influence, or able to elect people into authority that can dictate Christian morality to culture and through law or whatever, that we're not. I think we're just unsettled because um, are we ready to be Christians in a non-Christian culture? Like, we've been talking about that for a long time, but it's still got so much Christian culture in it that unsettledness, and for me, that's where it really will, separate those who are true followers of Jesus from those who aren't, because um,
Yeah.
it starts to not be easy. Like your friends overseas that I have, where
Yep.
you're
Yep.
worshiping Jesus without the freedoms that we have. In your op-ed,
Exactly.
that kind of segues nice into this. You mentioned that this is an opportunity for a do-over. What's going on right now there in Springfield or in communities like that? You said this. You said we have the opportunity to forge a safer, stronger, and more compassionate community by addressing immigration challenges while never losing sight of the humanity of those affected, immigrant or citizen alike. So, how are you seeing? What's some hope that you're seeing in Springfield of the opportunity for a do-over? Um, what ways do you, like, a year, 2 years down the road for Springfield? What hope do you have um, if the church takes the opportunity for this to be a do-over with how they love their neighbors and act as citizens in the U.S.? What's your hope for that?
Um, yeah, I do think this is an opportunity for a do-over. The context of that quote was, "It is really hard to read through American history, pick any country history, read through your Bible, and not find a story that is fully based on immigration. Like it's always a people moving from one place to another that was problematic, that involved oppression, that involved subjugation. And even when you look at our own American history, all the different subgroups that are in and make up this rich culture we call America are a culture of immigrants that somehow had to come and find their way, and often were abused or taken advantage of in some terrible ways. And so here's an opportunity for us to learn from our past, to let history be our teacher, and say the way we've done it historically has never really worked, and it's just caused a lot of pain. And we still have people groups in our country that are hurting because of what their history, involved. So what if we could do it over? What if even in the micro, in communities like Springfield or Findlay or other places where the community can kind of say, look, we don't have as much influence around the rest of the nation, and clearly we don't have a whole lot of influence in DC because they kind of do what they want. But
Mhm.
in our own community, like the church could rise up and lead, and the various expressions of the church in a community that could get together and say, we may not agree on some things, we may have some doctrinal or even some theological differences, but if we believe in Jesus, then we believe that he would have responded to this situation in a way that is consistent with loving others. So let's just do that. Let's just do it really, really well. So some of the things that I'm seeing here in Springfield, we are starting to launch English language training. It's not technically ESL, it's not certified, which is fine. That's not the
Mhm.
point. The point is
Yep.
not to give somebody a certificate. This is about survival. This is about learning how to assimilate to a culture. In my experience, both as an immigrant, but also working with this community, and I'm the chaplain for our police department, so I see it from that side as well. Language is really the key that unlocks a lot of other challenges that our community is facing. It's simply comes down to just a language barrier and not being able to fully understand customs and norms and responsibilities, and so that's causing a lot of that conflict. I'm
Mhm.
really grateful that when my parents moved to Mexico when I was 4 years old, there were national brothers and sisters that came alongside my family and said, "Hey, we'll show you how to do something." Like, for example, we don't go to the market on Friday because everything's fresh on Tuesday. Tuesday's the market day, and hey, we'll show you where you can go and pay this bill, or who you need to talk to get this service started. It took the local nationals to kind of help get our family acclimated. This is what we need to do now, and this is a great opportunity for the church because it becomes very relational.
Mhm.
My One of my team members, one of my staff members here, she took French in high school and into college, and we had a Haitian family about a little bit over a year ago that needed to go to Cleveland because it was time for their paperwork to be reviewed and renewed, and we needed a ride to get them there, and we needed somebody who had some language. And she said, "Hey, I speak French. It's kind of close. Like, I'll do it." So she drove a family of six, 3 hours north. And when she came back, what she shared was not what they were able to accomplish or how she was able to help with the legal system. She got to hear their story, and now they have an advocate and a friend, and at least somebody who knows they care. This is what the opportunity is for the church,
Mhm.
to be able to sit down and to make friends and to help them understand what life in Springfield or in Ohio or the United States looks like. And while doing that, tell me there isn't an incarnational way of sharing the gospel, of
Mhm.
living Jesus out in front of other people. So I'm hopeful that through these kind of touch points, which do not require us to agree on the legality of the bill or of, I mean, like,
Mhm.
all of that can be a discussion for another forum. The reality is 20,000 people are here, and we need to help them be able to understand what it looks like to live here for everybody's life to be
Mhm.
improved, for the roads to be safer, and all those kind of things that are the challenges. Like, it starts by just stepping across the street and building a relationship and helping people understand like what it means to live here. And so I think that is a huge opportunity. The story that could be said about a community that opened its arms and said, "You're here, how you got here, like is up for debate, but you're here, and we're going to
Mhm.
love you because you're here. Because by loving you, we're actually welcoming, Jesus in you in that way. And so I think about the Benedictine order of monks that had a whole practice on hospitality, and it involved welcoming a stranger because you are welcoming Jesus in them. Like
Mhm.
you're acknowledging they are the image bearer of the Creator.
Mhm.
And I think that it would be great for the church to take that posture and say, hey, these are fellow image bearers of God, and they are in our
Mhm.
midst. Let's welcome them. Let's love them. Let's care for them,
Mhm.
because we're caring for Jesus in them.
Yeah, the author of the other op-ed mentioned some of the irritations of like being in a checkout line and them standing like shoulder to shoulder so you can't get to the open line. And it's like, so again, how they got here, that if we set that aside and say, let's do our civic duty, talk to our legislators about that. But if you get irritated because they're standing shoulder to shoulder, they're here right now, and you can make their life and your life easier by saying, hey, instead of just yelling at them or pushing through them or just being irritated, what can I do to make everybody's life better? If you have a little fender bender with someone, wouldn't you rather that person be able to communicate with you than it to seem like a lost cause? Or if you are the cause of the fender bender, that you can talk
Right.
to them as opposed to just like, well, I guess I'm out of this one. And yeah, there's just a lot while they're here, um, that we can make their life and our life better. And then again, hold the federal government accountable to
Absolutely.
how they're getting here. Are they to stay here? All of that kind of stuff. But they're here. How do we do that? Um, so maybe you wore your long sleeve, I don't know if that's a hoodie or not, on purpose for my next question, because I sent these to you. You ended on what for some readers may have seemed like a completely different topic. And I should say, for those who are only listening to this, Jeremy's shirt there says, speak a good word for Springfield or say nothing. That ties into this. You ended on the topic of slander. So
Mhm.
after a whole list about federal government and immigration and loving your neighbor, I'm pretty sure I know why, but for someone who maybe didn't quite see why you ended on slander, why did you end on that note?
Yeah, I think the drive for that op-ed, that communication, was really a call to remind the church of who we are and whose we are, and what does behavior consistent with that identity look like across the board. And one of the things that I have found myself as a pastor and a spiritual guide to some, a counselor, is reminding them that the rules don't change in political seasons. They don't change in when it comes to like things that are making the national media, like who we've been called to be and the behavior that we are encouraged by Jesus and and all the writers of the New Testament. And that those are constants. And so what I'm seeing happen is people that I know, people that are that I have heard profess to be followers of Jesus Christ, are getting sucked into this vortex of opinion and passing on information. And it feels like we've kind of stepped into this space where we are sharing things that are slanderous, that are we don't know to be true, and we're just hitting like the reshare button, or we're posting it with some, I heard this, and it just kind of seems to be incongruent with behavior that we know is not acceptable or not consistent with being a follower of Jesus Christ anywhere else. And so, that was kind of that reminder of, we can have an opinion, we can even have our gut about what happened or what didn't happen or whatever. But the point is, whenever we decide to say something, or even if we share something that someone else has said, and that's been the part where I've probably found most of the tension, is that
Mhm.
I've asked people, why are you saying this? Why would you post that? And they're like, well, I didn't post it. Somebody else did. I just shared it. And I was just kind of having this surreal moment of saying, but do you realize by you sharing it, it's you sharing it. It's you speaking it again. And so as we saw the echo effect of people that take something that they don't know to be true, or in some cases actually know to not be true, but it's
Mhm.
more convenient as if it were true, and start sharing it. Like we have this like snowball effect. And I think that's why Jesus and Paul talked about like not doing this, because it has this this echoing damage effect that as those words ring out, whether they're done verbally or they're done online, it just causes more and more destruction. And so I kind of tagged that at the end as kind of a one last thing, and maybe something that I wanted to hopefully is that Christ followers would read it and go, oh, I might need to change my behavior, especially online. That if I don't know something to be true, but I say it or post it or share it like it is, like I'm in that whole neighborhood of actually saying things that are false. And the Bible's pretty clear about what we do there. So it was an attempt to remind us all that we still have to be consistent with who we are as Christ followers, even in the midst of the turmoil and all of the noise. We can't get caught up in it. And so just to try to hearken people back to remembering that's the standard.
I appreciate that. I may be a little bit more firm. It's lying that now, if you don't know that it's not true and you share it, that's still a mistake. That is still something, once you realize that it was not true, that you should acknowledge I shared stuff that was not true. But when you know it's not true and it just fits the argument you want to make, that's called lying. There's a commandment
Exactly.
about that. It's in the Old Testament. New Testament, Jesus says we'll be held accountable for every word that we speak. That includes words that are retweeted and liked and shared and all
Absolutely.
that stuff. And James said, be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to get angry. And
Yep.
this is what the call of God's people is. And
Yep.
um, and I think that if we could remove ourselves from this and go back to the good old days when like arguing against atheism was like the big thing that Christians dealt with. Just because atheists said there is no God, and they said it over and over and over again, that did not make it true. It never
Right.
made that true. We Christians now start to do that, where we take something that is not true and we think just because it said more than something else, that now that makes it true. And that is us adopting um, the enemy, his
Yeah.
tactic of spreading lies. That's us adopting into there is no such thing as truth, and at best, it's Christians being extremely foolish. At
Hmm.
worst, it's us being ungodly and just pleasing our enemy. And so, I would just say that speaking to Gateway, um, do not think that people will trust your word that Jesus is the only way to salvation when they cannot trust your word when you're spreading stuff about this political season or
100%.
yeah. Um,
Yeah.
do not be
100%.
surprised. Yeah. Yeah, it
I
is just
found that,
yeah.
and maybe Josh, sorry, maybe this
No,
has
go
been
ahead.
your experience too. I found, especially with the American church, we are quick to jump to being these crusaders for truth. And right now, I think we're the challenge is that we're actually wanting to adjust truth to to be what would fit our narrative sometimes, which is a problem. But even before that, like I've got to stand up for truth. We've got to stand up for truth. I don't remember Jesus actually telling us. I can remember him telling us to stand on truth. I
Mhm.
remember him telling us that his word will remain. One
Stand
of our
firm in the
elders here
faith. Yeah.
is stand in the faith for sure.
Yeah.
But one of our elders is famous for saying Jesus doesn't need a lawyer. Jesus
Mhm.
doesn't need us to argue his case for him.
Mhm.
What Jesus told us to do is that our primary calling card as his followers is the way we love. Like we leave the truth to him, we stand on it firm. We are ready to answer when anybody asks us to give a reason for our faith. But somehow, and maybe this is, maybe this has been your experience. I see often like we want to go campaigning with batons and like the Bible to beat people over the head with truth, when really Jesus never called us to do that. Jesus called us to love well. And then his truth is seen in our lives. But we like to shout down things that we don't think are true, and we need to stand for truth. And I keep coming back to Jesus saying, if you'll just love well, if you're love well, and that's not to soften any of our theologies. It's
Mhm.
just saying, like, we lead with love. And in leading with love, to your point, if I've loved you well, you're more likely to receive and want to know what truth I base my life on
Mhm.
than me getting in a public shouting match or an online shouting match over what is true or not true or should be true or whatever. I just feel like we would do much better to just focus on the love piece and let the Holy Spirit work on the truth piece.
And I'll just add to this because you had a flight attendant from another country that um, we don't know what to do with what we read on the internet these days. And if everybody could just acknowledge
Absolutely.
that um, again, I think back to James, be slow to speak because from other articles, and again, I can say I still don't even know this is true, but the author of the original "Pets Are Being Stolen and Eaten" and all this kind of stuff has said they made that up. I've seen that. I've
Yep.
seen that a picture of someone carrying away a dog was actually from Columbus and not from Springfield. Like,
Yep.
but when it
A goose.
immediately
Yeah.
gets in there, and but it's like I get somebody can listen and I go, oh, but do you know if that was really from Columbus? Do you know if that lady really recanted? Do you know if the mayor of Springfield has said, guys, this isn't happening. Please stop spreading this? Because whoever they're listening to keeps saying it. And so if we could all just acknowledge we are living in such a crazy time where somebody could post they've actually seen a unicorn and there's going to be people that believe it, like where 20 years ago we'd be like, no, I don't think that that's possible, that now it's just believed. And yeah, so if we
Yeah.
could all just pause. I people hear it all the time, like we just need to pause and get off of our news feeds and get off of our social media and yeah, talk to the person next to you. That's why I wanted to talk to you, because you're in
Yeah.
Springfield, and we're all hearing these crazy stories. But to me, it's just almost insane that a lady from Korean Airlines is asking you, like, that's the first thing she wants to know. What would you say? And then I'll give you if you have any other final words. So here we are in Findlay. We got maybe other people listening. We're not in Springfield. We don't have nearly the number of immigrants that you all have. I think the number I've heard is 1,000 here. Mainly, we don't have the housing, and so like they there's just not
Yeah.
housing for them to move to. But we're still seeing division, confusion, unsettledness because of these changes in our community. What would you say to your fellow Christians living in a place like Findlay, Ohio?
Um, my my encouragement would be to focus on the ways and the places where you can make the most slash eternal difference. Um, there is a space for a conversation to be had about federal programs. And, right now it's that season because we're in the middle of an election cycle and it obviously made the debate platform. And we'll see what happens this week as the vice presidential debate comes up. So I get it. I get why we're talking about what's being talked about nationally. But I think we always have to come back to, as a church, like the local minded awareness of the church. I say this to our family at fellowship all the time. Like, God has entrusted us with Springfield. Of all the cities that God could have planted fellowship in, He planted it in Springfield. He's given us the spiritual custodial care of our community. And the way that we respond and even just deal with our community should improve the lives of everyone in our community, regardless of whether they ever darken the entrance of our door.
Mhm,
We say often, like, a rising tide should raise all the ships in the harbor. And
mhm.
so, if we are being salt and light in our community, it should be in a way where people's lives are better simply by proximity, because you cannot be around an ambassador of the gospel of Jesus Christ and not have your life quotient go up.
Hmm.
And there is no us and they in that kind of a thing. There's not them on that side and then us. It's this community. And so my encouragement would be that where there is a space for dinner table conversations about the policies and practices of certain legislation, what really matters most is how we conduct ourselves and how we are aware of the community that God has given us. And if God grows that community by 1,000 people, by another from another nation, or 20,000 people from another nation, God is entrusting us with the spiritual care of those people. And so that should be our rallying call to what do we do, what do we say, and where do we put all of our emphasis in that. And so I would just bring us back to what matters most, and it's that eternal impact that could be made.
Hey, well, thank you for that word, Jeremy. Thank you for your time. That's all of my questions. You got anything else? If not, I will.
I would just encourage everyone who maybe is listening is trying to figure out like where they land with this. First of all, I can tell you that the mayor of Springfield is one of my best friends. I was with him. Our daughters played volleyball together, so um, they are definitely not eating our pets. So I just keep saying that over and over again. As people ask me, like I think we have to correct untruth. So I just want to put that out there. That is not happening. Um, the first Haitian family that I got to spend a significant amount of time with, they started attending our church, and I set up a meeting with them. I don't speak Haitian Creole, but they had lived for a little bit of time in Colombia, and they had picked up Spanish. And so when they walk in on this Sunday, of all people in our church to walk up to, they walk up to the senior pastor who happens to also be fluent in Spanish. And so we developed this friendship, and they ended up having a child. We had got to do a bilingual baby dedication with them. But early on in them coming to our church, I sat down with them for about 2 hours, and they shared with me their story. And their story is that before COVID, before all this happened, because of everything that was going on in Haiti, they left Haiti and went to Colombia because he was going to go to nursing school. COVID happens. The Colombian government says you've got 48 hours if you're not Colombian to get out of Colombia. We don't care where you go, what you do. You just have 48 hours to leave. And this family was displaced 48 hours later, and they walked from Colombia to Texas.
Wow.
So get out a map, Google that, and just see what that means over the next 6 months of their life. He had a heart attack. They were mugged and robbed several times as they tried to make their way through Mexico. I mean, just this incredible story. And when I asked the mom, who was the primary storyteller, I said, "What made you keep going?" She said, "God told me that if we were faithful, he was going to take care of us. And we just knew that we had to get to Texas because this program was available." And it's hard to sit down and hear a family struggle like that and still villainize a group of people. So if you're struggling to try to understand where you're at with this whole issue, find somebody from that community, ask them to have coffee, and ask to hear their story. And it will shape the way that you look. It doesn't necessarily change the way you're going to see the legislation or the program, but it will definitely change the way you see people. And I think it will help us all have a better, the eyes of Jesus for those people. So that would be my encouragement in all of this, is to sit down and just get to know their stories, because it's helpful in knowing how to respond.
Yeah, something I've been thinking a lot about that was very good is that the immigration policy, we can call that an issue, but let's not call these people an issue. These are
They're
people.
not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks again, Jeremy, for doing this. Appreciate your time. Appreciate your word. God bless.
Thank you. Appreciate it.